I've always had an affinity for the old, the forgotten. You could say I collect remnants of the past, hoping to preserve a sliver of history that time is all too eager to erode. But nothing, not the Victorian love letters nor the rusted lockets from wars long ended, could have prepared me for the mirror. It was a dreary Saturday when I wandered into the flea market, the kind where the clouds hang low and seem intent on suffocating the earth beneath a heavy gray blanket. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and mothballs, a scent that always accompanied such antique hunts. Stalls sprawled before me, each a small testament to someone's history, but it was the one manned by a man with darting eyes that caught my obsessive gaze. He stood beside a mirror that was tall, nearly my height, with an ornate frame that twisted and curled into shapes that danced between elegance and the macabre. "This one," he said, his voice a hushed whisper, as if he feared being overheard, "has been difficult to keep." His nervous glances, the subtle quiver in his tone, they should have been a warning. But the mirror. It beckoned. "How much for the mirror?" I asked, my voice barely above the patter of rain that had begun to fall. "Take it," he said quickly, a look of relief washing over him as he avoided any direct gaze into the reflective surface. "No charge, just take it off my hands." His eagerness to rid himself of the mirror should have set off alarms, should have sent me walking away. But it didn't. Instead, I found myself entranced, drawn to the silent whispers that seemed to emanate from its surface. It was as if the mirror knew me, understood me, and with that feeling of kinship, I wrapped the mirror in an old blanket and took it home. As I set it against the living room wall of my small apartment, a sense of triumph filled me. This was my find, my prize. I would later come to realize that it was not I who had found the mirror, but the mirror that had chosen me. That night, with the rain tapping against the windows like 1,000 tiny fingers, the whispers began. At first, they were like the sighs of a forlorn lover, gentle and soft. I convinced myself it was just the wind, or the old pipes in the building groaning with age. But whispers have a way of growing louder when they hold a truth you're desperate to hear. And as I would learn, some truths are too heavy for the soul to bear. This mirror, this beautifully cursed relic, it had a voice, and it was determined to be heard. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? With every word that slithered from the glass, a part of my world was stripped away, revealing a reality I never knew existed. What I thought was a victory was the beginning of an awakening, one that would unravel the tapestry of my sanity thread by thread. The first chapter of my descent had been written, and the ink was as black as the abyss that gazed back at me from within the whispering mirror. The nights that followed the mirror's arrival were filled with an eerie stillness, as if my apartment had become a mausoleum for forgotten voices. It was on the third night, as the world around me was plunged into the depths of sleep, that the whispers clawed their way through the silence. At first, they were like the murmurs of a restless dream, so faint I thought I had imagined them. But as the nights crept by, they grew louder, clearer, like a chorus of the damned determined to be heard. The words were tangled, a cryptic mess that entwined around my thoughts, begging for deciphering. I should have been afraid. I should have felt the icy touch of dread. Instead, curiosity pricked at my senses. The whispers, they knew things, secrets about my neighbors, hidden truths about friends I thought I knew. They spoke of infidelities, betrayals, and shrouded intentions. It was a window into the private theaters of those around me, and I was the sole audience. At the break of dawn, I would test the truths that had been fed to me in the darkness. "Did you hear about Linda and Mark?" I'd casually drop into the conversation at the coffee shop. The shocked expressions, the wide eyes, they were all the confirmation I needed. The mirror wasn't just whispering, it was revealing. The obsession began as a mere flicker, a flame that consumed my every waking thought. I craved the nightfall, the time when the whispers would resume their sordid tales. I was hooked on the potency of knowledge, the power that came with it. I was the keeper of secrets, a puppeteer with the strings of information that the whispers so freely gave. But like any addiction, the cost was steep. My nights belonged to the mirror, and the days. The days were just interludes, brief pauses in the symphony of whispered revelations. I started to look at people differently, judging them with the weight of their hidden vices heavy on my mind. The power was intoxicating, and I, drunk on its bitter wine, didn't see the chains it was wrapping around me. The whispers didn't just want to be heard, they wanted to be heeded. And I, ever the ardent listener, obeyed. It wasn't long before the whispers took a sinister turn. They began to weave prophecies of darkness, of things to come that were soaked in malice and blood. The secrets were no longer just past transgressions but future horrors. I was no longer just an observer, I was becoming an unwilling oracle. Sleep became a distant memory, a luxury I couldn't afford. My eyes would mirror the ghostly pallor of the spirit in the glass, and I would listen until the stars dimmed and the first light of dawn crept into my prison of prophecy. The mirror had become my world, and as I teetered on the edge of madness, I began to fall. The whispers didn't just predict the darkness, they became the maestro of a symphony of impending doom, orchestrating a series of events that would unfold with the inevitability of a Greek tragedy. I, Jamie, once a mere collector of antiquities, found myself anointed as the seer of fates, blessed, or cursed, with the sight to see the unseen. It started with small, inconsequential things. A whisper would hint at a neighbor's pet going missing or a distant relative falling ill. Each time, I found myself speaking up, warning them, driven by a sense of duty that the mirror instilled in me. And each time, the events unfolded just as the whispers had foretold. But as autumn shed its last leaf and the grip of winter began to tighten, the mirror's prophecies grew dire. They spoke of fires that would consume homes, of betrayals that would tear families apart, and of shadows that would creep into the hearts of the innocent. With each fulfilled prophecy, the image in the glass grew clearer, the vengeful spirit, her eyes hollow with centuries of rage. My intervention became an obsession. I reached out to people, strangers even, trying to prevent the tragedies that only I knew were looming on the horizon. I saved a man from a ruinous business venture, I warned a friend of her partner's infidelity, and I called in an anonymous tip that prevented a catastrophe. People began to talk. They whispered about my uncanny intuition, and whispers of a different kind echoed in hushed tones behind closed doors. But the mirror was not a benevolent god. Its whispers were tinged with malice, and soon the prophecies became personal. They began to paint a future where my own life was the one unraveling. The mirror showed me visions of my demise, of friends turning their backs on me, of love dissolving into acrimony, and of my own hands, stained with an act so vile it seemed impossible. I fought against the tide, tried to keep my head above the water that the mirror muddied with its cruel predictions. I clung to my sanity like a life raft, but the reflection that stared back at me each night began to twist and contort into a visage I no longer recognized. The spirit in the mirror began to visit me not just in reflections but in dreams. She walked the shadowy corridors of my sleep, her whispers turned into screams that shook the foundations of my mind. Her eyes were pits of despair, and her mouth, a gate to an abyss that promised an end to the relentless torrent of foresight. I woke night after night, drenched in a cold sweat, the echoes of her screams still bouncing off the walls of my room. My days became a blur, a gray smear of time that offered no respite from the torment the mirror inflicted upon me. Friends grew concerned, their furrowed brows and sidelong glances a testament to my deteriorating state. The whispers, the prophecies, they didn't just reflect what was to come, they cast a shadow on everything that was. The spirit's vengeance was not just aimed at those who had wronged her in her past life, but at me, the one who had dared to peer into her domain of sorrow. I stood before the mirror, my reflection fractured by the spiderweb cracks that had begun to mar its once immaculate surface. In it, I saw myself, or at least the remnants of the person I once was. Around me, the room spun, a carousel of chaos driven by the whispers that had once been my gift but had now become my curse. And there, in the heart of my reflection, stood the spirit, her silhouette a dark smudge against the backdrop of my fractured sanity. She was the puppeteer, and I, the puppet, dancing to the discordant tune of her whispers. Reflections of madness, indeed. The final prophecy was whispered in a language of despair, a foretelling of my own ruin. The room was dim, save for the ghastly luminescence that seeped from the mirror's surface, coating everything in an otherworldly pallor. My name is Jamie, and this may be the last piece of my story I can tell before my mind fragments beyond recognition. The whispers had stopped being a trickle of insidious secrets and had become a torrent of personal torment. The mirror, with its ornate frame and ancient glass, had promised power but delivered only devastation. Friends, those few who had remained, watched me with eyes wide with fear and confusion. My words, once met with awe, now provoked only suspicion and whispers of madness. They could not see the shadow that stood behind the glass, her eyes hollow with rage and malice. They could not hear her voice, dripping with the venom of the damned, spelling out the narrative of my demise. I had become a pariah, shunned by those who once sought my counsel. The spirit within the mirror had shown me my future, a future where the world turned against me. In desperation, I reached out to the ones I loved, but they recoiled from my touch as if I were a harbinger of their own undoing. The spirit's laughter, a sound like the shattering of 1,000 mirrors, filled my nights, eroding the last bastions of my sanity. With trembling hands, I attempted to rid myself of the cursed object that had become my jailer. I threw it to the ground, but it did not break. I struck it with hammers, but it stood defiant. It seemed invincible, as if the spirit within fed on my desperation, growing stronger with every attempt to shatter its form. In a moment of brutal clarity, the mirror revealed to me the spirit's own end, a brutal demise, hands gripping her throat, her life extinguished by a lover's betrayal. Her final gasp was a curse, her spirit condemned to the reflective prison. That revelation was a mirror to my own path. My hands had become instruments of ruin, lashing out at the mirror, at the world, at my own reflection. My mind, once a fortress of rationality, was now a labyrinth where every turn led to further despair. In a last, violent confrontation, I gathered every ounce of strength and hurled myself against the mirror. The glass resisted, then yielded, fragments cascading around me like a storm of razor-sharp rain. Each piece reflected a moment of my downfall, a tableau of my lost sanity. But it was in the shattering of the mirror that the spirit unleashed her final act of vengeance. As the glass fell, so too did the barrier between her world and mine. The air grew cold, the shadows in the corners of my room lengthened, and her spectral form stepped out of the ruins, her whisper now a deafening echo in the void that my apartment had become. She had one last secret to share, and as the world I knew crumbled, she leaned in close, her spectral lips near my ear, and whispered the truth of her death. A truth that reflected my own life with such eerie similarity that for a moment, I wondered if I was looking into the past or a forewarning of my own grim fate. The darkness in my heart, fueled by the whispers, had led me to this precipice, and as the spirit's presence enveloped me, I understood that my downfall was not just a prophecy, it was a cycle repeating, a history relived, a fate sealed by the whispering mirror. In the fragmented remains of the mirror, my apartment had become a mausoleum of memories, each shard a testament to the life I once knew. The room swayed as if on the verge of collapse, mirroring the tremulous state of my mind. Jamie, once a seeker of lost treasures, now lost in the ruins of a cursed odyssey. The spirit's form loomed before me, a specter of wrath and sorrow. Her face, once twisted by the malice of her untimely death, now bore an expression of profound sadness, as if the shattering of her prison had unshackled her vengeance and unveiled the weight of eternal regret. She did not speak, the air was too dense for whispers now. Her story unfolded in silence, a pantomime of betrayal and tragedy. I watched, as though from a great distance, her life playing out in the glass fragments, a mirror to my own. Love, loss, and the final, dreadful act that bound her to the cursed mirror. Her eyes met mine, a cold communion that melded past and present. In her gaze, I saw the trajectory of my own downfall, the isolation, the obsession, the madness. It was a spiral, a helix that had ensnared us both, history's echo. I understood then what I must do. The spirit sought release, not through vengeance but through the breaking of the cycle. I felt the power of the mirror, still pulsing through the splinters, a force that could be ended only by one who had suffered its curse. With hands that felt both foreign and familiar, I gathered the shards, each cut a line between what was real and what was reflection. I positioned them in the ancient frame, a mosaic of broken edges and splintered truths. The spirit watched, her presence a pressure on the edges of my consciousness. As the last piece clicked into place, I felt the pull of the mirror, a gravitational force that threatened to drag me into its depths. I spoke then, my voice a fragile thing amidst the cacophony of breaking glass and collapsing certainties. I release you, I whispered, not knowing if I addressed the spirit or myself. The air shimmered, and the room filled with a light so pure it was blinding. When it faded, the spirit was gone, and the mirror stood whole once more, its surface calm and unyielding. I was left in the silence, the whispers gone. The mirror reflected only the room, and myself, standing amidst the clutter of an ordinary life. Yet, there was a difference, an absence. I felt it in the stillness, a quiet so profound it was as if the world had taken a breath and held it. Was I free? Or had I taken the spirit's place within the mirror's domain? The prophecy of my downfall had been so clear, but in its fulfillment, there was ambiguity. I stepped closer to the mirror, searching my own eyes for signs of madness or clarity. I reached out, my fingertip touching the cold glass. There was no whisper, no shadow waiting in the wings. Only my reflection, staring back at me with eyes full of wonder and dread. The ending is yours to ponder, a shattered mirror reformed, a spirit released, and a man standing on the precipice of understanding. Is this the reality, or merely another whisper from the mirror?
It's a truth universally acknowledged by any self-respecting travel blogger that the most intriguing places are those shrouded in mystery. That's precisely why I found myself at the reception desk of the Hotel Whispers, a name I had chuckled at when booking online. Yet, as I lugged my suitcase over the threshold, the name seemed to suit the place, which had an air of the enigmatic, whispering its secrets in the creak of floorboards and the murmur of distant voices. I introduced myself to the clerk, a man with weary eyes and a practiced smile. Alex Werner. I have a reservation. Of course, Mr. Werner, he said, perusing the ledger. Room 312. Ah, right next to our special room. My ears perked up. Special room? He hesitated, then leaned forward, as if sharing a conspiracy. Room 313. It's not for guests. They say it's reserved for eternal guests. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Every so often, lights flicker in there and, well, you might hear things. But it's just old pipes and faulty wiring, we assure you. I chuckled. Sure. I'll keep that in mind. Settling into room 312 was uneventful. The decor was charmingly antique, and the bed promised comfort. I had just begun unpacking when I noticed it. The faint glimmer of light under the adjoining door to room 313. A shiver of excitement ran down my spine. Faulty wiring indeed. I grabbed my digital recorder, a habit from many a haunted hotel stay, and pressed it against the door. Silence at first, then a murmur, like the distant sound of a party where laughter never quite reached joy. Curious, I thought. After dinner, the true show began. The lights under room 313's door danced like candle flames in a draft. Hushed conversations grew louder, just beyond my ability to make out words. They seemed to carry a desperate undertone, a plea. I placed my ear against the cool wood, straining to listen, to understand. Why did you come here, Alex? The voice was clear, inches from my face, though separated by the door. My heart skipped. I hadn't told the clerk my first name. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped back, staring at the door as if it might reveal its secrets. The rational part of my brain began its usual reassurances. It's just a prank. Or perhaps the hotel staff having a bit of fun with a legend. But the storyteller in me, the part that chased ghosts and spun tales from the threads of the unexplained, quivered with anticipation. There was a story here in room 313, a story that the eternal guests seemed eager to share. And I, Alex Werner, travel blogger and seeker of the world's mysteries, was here to uncover it. Little did I know this story would be my last. The night promised more than just whispers, and as I prepared my camera and my nerves for what was to come, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes upon me, watching, waiting, from just beyond the veil. The lights flickered once more, and the murmur rose to a whispered cacophony, as if room 313 were calling to me, inviting me in. And God help me, I wanted to answer that call. The clock's hands were closing in on midnight, the so-called witching hour when the veil between worlds is thinnest. That's what I grew up hearing, anyway. I had my camera set up facing the door to room 313, the small red light winking at me like an omen. The very air of Hotel Whispers seemed charged, expectant, as if it knew something I didn't. I'd spent the evening poring over local archives, learning the lore of room 313. The tales were as varied as they were chilling: a jilted bride, a gambler who'd bet his soul, a woman who'd whispered secrets to the walls. But no story was consistent, the only truth being that tragedy clung to the room like cobwebs. Now, in the deep stillness of my own room, I was beginning to understand why. The lights next door began to pulse, a rhythmic heartbeat that grew more insistent. I gripped my camera tighter, thumb hovering over the record button. Then it happened. A shadow passed the frosted window of room 313. Not the fleeting shape of a passing car or the silhouette of a tree swaying in the wind, but the distinct outline of a person. I pressed record. My breath fogged in the air before me, a stark reminder that the temperature had dropped. Cold spots. Classic haunting phenomenon. Is someone there? I called out softly. I wasn't sure what I expected. An answer, maybe. A sign. Instead, what I got was silence, then a whisper. It was faint, like the rustle of leaves in autumn, and it circled me, words indiscernible. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And not just by the audience who would later devour this footage with a skeptic's scorn or a believer's fervor, but by someone, or something, on the other side of that wall. The whispers grew clearer, urgent. They spoke of help, of rest, and of vengeance. I froze, the last word hanging in the air between breaths. Vengeance against whom? My camera captured it all. The flickering lights, the shifting shadows, and the whispered pleas. I sat there, the weight of centuries pressing down on me, every instinct screaming to run, to leave this place and its ghosts to their eternal unrest. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered back, I hear you. The night crept on, my vigil unbroken, the footage accruing. And as the first rays of dawn began to seep through the curtains, the whispers fell silent, the shadows retreated, and the lights in room 313 extinguished. The camera's red light blinked out. Battery drained, leaving me in the half-light, surrounded by the ghosts of words and a new understanding. The eternal guests wanted more than to be heard. They wanted to be seen, to be known. And I, Alex Werner, had opened the door to their world. The day brought no respite, only anticipation of the night to come and what I would find when I finally stepped into room 313. But that is a tale for another time, when the sun sets, and the dead stir once more. For now I signed off, upload the night's harrowing evidence, and wait. My hands were still trembling from the night's vigil as I descended the grand staircase to the lobby. The morning light did little to dispel the darkness that had settled over my thoughts. I needed answers, and it was the hotel's whisper-thin concierge who provided the next thread for me to follow, a retired housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor, who'd seen too much and spoke too little. I found her at a nearby cafe, a quiet establishment that smelled of ground coffee and old books. She was a small woman with spectacles perched on a nose worn down by years of looking too closely at the world. The guests of room 313, she began, her voice a hushed tremor. They were a peculiar pair, always too cheerful, but their eyes were haunted. She told me of the couple's arrival years ago, a stay meant to be temporary but became permanent. And then, the whispers of a scandal, an affair that ended in a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the hotel's corridors one fateful night. The couple was found no more, vanished like mist, leaving behind only questions. The room, she continued, it doesn't keep them in. It keeps them out. That night, armed with Mrs. Eleanor's tale, I returned to room 313. The air felt charged, an electric current running through my veins. I was no longer just an observer, I was a participant in a tragedy written long before my time. The lights flickered on as if welcoming me back, and I saw them, the eternal guests. They were as real as the room's decaying wallpaper, their faces distorted in an agony that death had not relieved. They reenacted their demise for me, spectral images of a man driven by jealousy and a woman's betrayal. The man's ghostly hands reached for a woman who was no longer there, and the woman's specter screamed a silent scream that I felt in my bones. I watched, rooted to the spot, as the man's rage turned to violence, a phantom struggle that left both parties destroyed. In their spectral eyes, I saw their plea. They wanted to rest, to leave the earthly plane, but something kept them tethered to room 313. Their gazes turned to me, beseeching. I understood then, they wanted their story told, their truth revealed. I recorded it all, the reenactment of their final, fateful night, a macabre dance of love turned lethal. It was brutal, unrelenting, and as the apparitions faded with the rising sun, I was left with a heavy burden. The video was more than evidence, it was a testament to a sorrow that had permeated the walls of room 313, a sorrow that now lived in me. Dawn brought no comfort, only the weight of the unseen guest's untold story, a story that I would have to tell, one way or another. My blog, once a place for travel tips and cheerful anecdotes, had become a medium for the voices of the dead. And so I write this entry, a confession and a revelation, hoping that in the telling, I might grant peace to those restless souls. But as the day wanes, I fear what the night will bring, for their tale is not yet finished, and neither, it seems, is mine. Courage, or maybe it was folly, pushed me to do the unthinkable. As night fell, I stood at the door of room 313, the key cold and heavy in my hand. The decision to spend the night was a reckless leap into the unknown, spurred by a need for answers that gnawed at my very soul. I turned the key and the door creaked open, a sound that seemed like a moan from the depths of the forgotten. The room welcomed me with a stagnant air that made my lungs feel heavy. With every step inside, I felt the veil between the living and the dead grow thinner. My camera, my ever-present witness, stood ready to record the night's events. The clock ticked away the seconds as I lay on the bed that had not cradled life in years, a bed that seemed to harbor the echoes of the past. Midnight struck, and the play began anew. The lights flickered, the atmosphere charged with a silent, electric scream. The room breathed, the walls bled shadows. And they appeared, the eternal guests, their figures clearer now, solid yet spectral. Their eyes found mine, and in that gaze, I was swept into the terror of their last moments. It was a loop, a never-ending cycle of accusation and rage. They were no longer just reenacting, they were reliving, and I had become an actor in their tragedy. The ghostly man, face twisted in a rage that death had not dulled, turned on me. His spectral hands, icy and filled with fury, reached for my throat. I tried to scream, but the room swallowed the sound. I was trapped in their story, mistaken for the architect of their pain. The woman, her face a mirror of sorrow and betrayal, watched on, her wails a soundtrack to my impending doom. The man's grip tightened, and the line between their reality and mine blurred into nothingness. This was no mere haunting, it was a reckoning. A trial by specter, where I stood accused of sins not my own. The room spun, a vortex of whispers and screams, anger and despair so potent it was a tangible thing, wrapping around my neck like the man's hands. I gasped for air, fighting against the hold of one long departed. My life, my story, flickered before my eyes, not yet ready to end. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the violence ceased. The ghosts stepped back, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion to recognition. They realized I was not the one they sought, but the realization came too late. The room calmed, but the damage was done. I lay there gasping, the weight of death, a cloak around my shoulders. The camera's red light blinked on, the only witness to my final moments. As dawn approached, the room returned to its deceitful peace, and I knew my time was short. With trembling hands I write this entry, a final testament to the truth of room 313. The eternal guests, still bound to their chamber of horrors, had found their voice through me, but at what cost? My vision fades, the room grows cold, and I understand now that some stories, once begun, demand to be finished, no matter the ending they seek. Farewell. The morning light held none of its usual warmth as it crept through the windows of the ancient hotel. In the stillness of dawn, the housekeepers moved silently through the halls, their routines a dance of practiced efficiency. It was Marlene, with her cart laden with linens and cleaning supplies, who first noticed the door to room 313 slightly ajar. With a sigh, thinking of the extra work to reset the myth-shrouded room, she pushed the door open. The sight that met her was a stark contradiction to the room's notorious history. Everything was immaculate, just as it had been left the day before, save for the figure lying on the bed. Alex, the travel blogger who had checked in 2 days prior, was motionless. The camera, its red recording light extinguished, lay beside an outstretched hand, its lens staring blankly at the ceiling. Marlene's scream pierced the morning's quiet, drawing a crowd of staff and guests. The police arrived swiftly, their investigation thorough but fruitless. The coroner declared the time of death as somewhere in the early hours before dawn, the cause an unfortunate accident, perhaps a heart attack brought on by an undiagnosed condition. The hotel's staff whispered amongst themselves, their eyes full of superstition as they recounted the blogger's obsession with room 313. They spoke in hushed tones of the midnight vigils and the chilling blog posts that had captivated an online audience. But superstition held no sway in the face of the law, and the case was closed with a note of tragic, but mundane finality. However, the tale was not yet over. Alex's followers, those avid readers who had lived vicariously through the travelogues, found a posthumous entry uploaded on the blog. It was the last piece of the puzzle, a first-hand account of the last, terrifying night in room 313. The narrative spoke of vengeful spirits and an inescapable loop of horror. It was a tale so vivid, so compelling, that it chilled the blood of all who read it. The video accompanying the entry was a masterpiece of terror, filled with images that blurred the line between this world and the next. It showed a confrontation with shadows that wept and raged, a glimpse into a past that refused to be forgotten. As the footage spread across the internet, Room 313 became a legend, a place of pilgrimage for those seeking the thrill of the supernatural. The hotel, once quaint and historic, now harbored a morbid fascination for the macabre. And in the shadows of Room 313, the eternal guests waited, their story told but their thirst for justice, or perhaps revenge, unquenched. The room remained reserved, an abode for those who had checked in but would never leave. As for Alex, the final blog entry ended with a chilling sentence that has since echoed in the annals of creepypasta lore. If you listen closely, amidst the quiet of the night, you can still hear the whispers of Room 313, a lullaby of the dead for those who dare to listen. And so the checkout time came and went, but the room never truly emptied. The door clicked shut behind me, a soft snick that marked the end of a relentless week. The seams of my shoulders, which held the tension of endless hours hunched over glowing screens, began to unwind as I shed the weight of my travel bag. Our apartment, greeted me with a familiar warmth that had been missing in sterile hotel rooms and cold airport lounges. Nathan was there, his smile the kind that ignites the stars in a velvet sky, and I melted into his embrace. "Welcome back, Lee," he whispered against my hair, his voice a soothing balm to my frayed senses. The evening unfolded like the petals of a night-blooming flower. Nathan had cooked, a rarity that told tales of his excitement for my return. Over plates of pasta that he claimed were Italian but tasted of unmeasured affection, we recounted tales of our days apart. He joked about the mishaps at his workshop. He was an artist, a sculptor of wood and dreams, and I shared anecdotes from the trip, leaving out the sleepless nights and creeping deadlines. We curled up on the couch, our legs tangled, as a playlist of soft indie tunes threaded the background. Nathan's thumb traced idle patterns on my palm, and in those quiet moments, my world was a fortress against the tide of the outside chaos. "You're home now," he murmured, as if reading my thoughts. "Yeah," I sighed. "I am." But the serenity was a delicate creature, a paper-thin illusion. As we laughed, a shadow flitted in the corner of my eye. I turned, catching only the tail end of something? A trick of the light, or perhaps a consequence of the lingering exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice a notch above a whisper. "See what?" Nathan's brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the room, protective instincts already kicking in. "Nothing," I shook my head, the unease nipping at my insides. "Just thought I saw a shadow or something." He studied me for a moment longer before pulling me closer. "You're just tired, love. You need rest." He was right, of course. The digital demands of my job as a graphic designer often played tricks on my mind. So I let it go, pushing away the fleeting dread, attributing it to the remnants of a weary traveler's mind. Later, as we lay in bed, the moon a silent witness through the gauzy curtains, sleep came for Nathan quickly, his breathing deep and even. I envied his ease, the way slumber embraced him without the usual dance of tossing thoughts and turned pillows. My own eyes were heavy, but as I drifted toward sleep, a cold draft kissed my cheek, a caress that felt both foreign and oddly familiar. Once more I felt it, an ephemeral presence in the room. My heart skipped, and I wanted to wake Nathan, to banish the creeping dread with his comforting arms. But what would I say? That the shadows seemed too thick, too intent? That the air felt charged with a silent whisper? I told myself it was just the wind, just the shifting of the building, just my overactive imagination. With a silent prayer for dreamless sleep, I closed my eyes, choosing to ignore the darkness that loitered in the corners. But the shadows, it seemed, had other plans. The stillness of dawn has always been a subtle herald of new beginnings, but this morning silence clawed at the edges of my consciousness with an urgency that felt wrong. It was too quiet, the absence of sound was suffocating, a vacuum where even the faintest whisper of life seemed to have been swallowed whole. My eyelids fluttered open to a pallid light seeping through the blinds, painting the room in the lifeless hues of early morning. I reached out for Nathan, craving the warm reassurance of his skin against mine, but my hand met only cold sheets. An inexplicable dread coiled in my stomach as I turned to find him lying motionless beside me, his face twisted in an expression of sheer terror. "Nathan." My voice was a feeble thread in the overwhelming quiet. I shook his shoulder, a silent plea in my touch, but he was as still as stone, his skin an unnatural shade of pallor. Panic ignited within me, a fierce blaze that set my heart racing. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb and clumsy as I dialed for help. As the rings echoed hollowly in my ear, my gaze swept the room, desperate for some sign of explanation, but there was none. No signs of a struggle, no evidence of an intruder, nothing but the chilling stillness that mocked my despair. The arrival of the paramedics broke the morbid spell. Their attempts at resuscitation were frantic symphonies of urgency that clashed with the ominous silence that had heralded this nightmare. But it was too late. The solemn shake of the head from the paramedic was a silent sentence to my heart's frantic questioning. The police arrived, our blue uniforms a stark contrast to the stark white of the room. They moved through the apartment with practiced efficiency, yet their brows furrowed in confusion at the scene before them. The detective, a man with eyes as tired as the lines etched into his face, pulled me aside. There's no sign of forced entry, no disturbance. It's as if. He trailed off, unwilling or unable to voice the baffling truth. And then there was Emily, my best friend since childhood. She had come over the night before to welcome me home with a sleepover like we used to have when we were kids. But when the police opened the guest room door, the nightmare doubled in its cruelty. Emily lay on the bed, her vibrant red hair fanned around her like flames snuffed out too soon, her lifeless eyes wide open and staring at some unseen horror. Another scream of grief and disbelief was tearing at my throat, but it felt trapped, muffled by the thick cocoon of shock that wrapped itself around me. The detectives whispered amongst themselves, their theories a hushed murmur that filled the void of answers. The mention of a silent, untraceable killer sent a shiver down my spine. A murderer that moved like a ghost, leaving no trace, no reason behind. Days turned into a blur of condolences, of numbing grief that settled in my bones. I was alone in a sea of people who offered sympathies but could not fathom the depths of my loss. Nathan and Emily, two pillars of my life, gone in one cruel, inexplicable swoop. As I stood at their joint funeral, the whispers reached my ears, whispers of an affair, of a secret love between Nathan and Emily. A betrayal that gutted me, leaving me hollow. They spoke of signs, of telltale glances I had never noticed, too blinded by my trust and love. In my shock, I found myself fleeing to my childhood home, to the emptiness of rooms filled with dust-covered memories. But even there, solace eluded me. Whispers in the night, movements just out of sight, the feeling of being watched by eyes filled with sorrow and anger. I couldn't escape the truth that Nathan and Emily's secret had followed me home, manifesting in a presence that felt both protective and vengeful. It was familiar in a way that chilled my soul, a presence that I had once known, that had once known me. It was then, in the gloom of my old room, that I felt him, my little brother, whose life had been cut tragically short years ago, whose love for me had been unwavering. The air seemed to crackle with his energy, his need to reach out to me, protect me from the pain that Nathan and Emily's betrayal had wrought. It was a protection that had transcended death, a ghostly vigil fueled by a brother's love and a terrible resolve. Under a sky as gray as the tombstones it hovered above, I stood silently at the edge of twin graves. The droning of the eulogy was a distant murmur against the cacophony of whispers that swirled around me, biting into my soul with the venom of betrayal. The secret Nathan and Emily had harbored came to me in fragments of overheard conversations, a jigsaw of deceit that their deaths had completed. In the sea of black-clad mourners, I felt an island of desolation. The revelation of their affair turned my grief into a jagged, hollow ache. I couldn't muster tears or rage. All that remained was the numbing cold of shock, wrapping around my heart like a shroud. It was a sorrow too heavy to bear alone, so I retreated to the one place that still held the echoes of innocent laughter and warmth, my childhood home. The old house, once vibrant with life, now whispered with the solitude of the years it had witnessed in silence. Its walls held secrets, a testament to a time when life was simpler and death was merely a shadow at the periphery of youthful immortality. But as the dusk crept in, the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The creak of the wooden floorboards here, the rustle of curtains there, though no wind sang through the open windows. In the heart of the night, the whispers found me again, rising from the darkness, it's a symphony of soft, sibilant sounds that seemed almost familiar. The reality of my solitude clashed with the sensation of being watched. It was an unsettling feeling that I had not experienced since I was a child, when the boundary between imagination and reality was yet to be cemented by the cynicism of adulthood. Objects seemed to move of their own volition, a picture frame slightly askew, a book no longer resting on the shelf where I was certain I had left it. In the mirror I caught glimpses of something or someone standing just over my shoulder, yet when I turned, I was met with nothing but the emptiness of the room. The presence was neither comforting nor openly malevolent, but it was there, an energy that seemed to be reaching out, touching my very thoughts. And then, in the small hours when the world held its breath, the presence took on a shape I recognized. My little brother, Jamie, his features obscured by the shadows that clung to him as though they were part of his very essence. His voice, when it finally came, was a whisper that raised the hair on my arms. Leah, he breathed, a plea entwined with the echoes of 1,000 unspoken words. It was Jamie, my little brother who had left the world so young, his life a story with too many chapters left unwritten. In his eyes, I saw the protective gaze that had followed me through childhood, the resolve that had once fought schoolyard bullies and nighttime fears. But now that protective vigil had transcended the boundaries of life and death, fueled by a love that not even the grave could quell. Jamie's spirit, anchored to this world by a fierce desire to shield me, had witnessed the treachery that unfolded behind my back, the pain that their betrayal would seed in my heart. I could feel the connection between us, an invisible thread woven from the fabric of memories and love that not even death could sever. And in that ethereal communion, I realized Jamie had left me clues, breadcrumbs on the path to a truth I was only beginning to grasp. The whispers were his voice, and the movements his attempts to communicate, a spectral dance between the world of the living and the dead. His protection had taken on a form darker than anything I could have imagined. And as the truth simmered to the surface, the cold embrace of the house around me felt like the prelude to revelations that would unravel the very fabric of my reality. The veil of night was a tapestry woven with phantoms and fears, and as Leah tossed in the grip of a restless slumber, her dreams were a stage for the macabre. She found herself walking the halls of her childhood home, yet it was changed, distorted by the lens of her nightmares. Walls bled shadows that reached for her with smoky fingers, and the air was thick with the scent of unseen decay. It was in this dreamscape that Leah first encountered him, her brother Jamie, clad in an aura of moonlight, his features both angelic and tormented. His eyes held galaxies of unshed sorrow, and when he spoke, it was a symphony of despair. "I knew, Leah," he whispered, his voice a waltz of pain and fury. "I knew, and I swore to protect you." Awakening with a start, Leah's heart was a staccato drumbeat against her ribs. The room was bathed in the pallid glow of the pre-dawn light, and it was there in the nightstand where once her phone had lain that she found it, the diary. It was a thing of her childhood, a repository of memories penned in Jamie's childish scrawl. Its pages were a gateway to the past, yellowed with age, but the words written upon them were as clear and cutting as the day they were inscribed. With trembling hands, Leah read each sentence, a revelation that twisted the knife of betrayal deeper. Jamie had known about Nathan and Emily. He had seen the signs, the lingering looks, the hushed conversations when they thought Leah was out of earshot. And in those innocent pages, Jamie had laid bare his intentions. If anything ever happens to Leah, he had written his words heavy with a child's simplistic understanding of justice, "I'll make them sorry. I'll make them all sorry." As she read, the room seemed to darken, and Jamie's presence materialized, a specter of rage and love intermingled. Leah could feel him all around her, his anger a palpable force that pushed against her senses. "You knew," Leah breathed, her voice a cracked whisper. "You knew, and you tried to protect me, even from beyond." Jamie's spectral form nodded, and the room grew colder, a chill that seeped into Leah's very soul. "They hurt you, Leah," Jamie's voice echoed, a spectral sound that filled the room. "I had to protect you. I had to make it right." Leah's eyes were wide as the truth dawned on her in a harrowing wave of horror. Jamie's spirit had not just been a passive watcher, it had been an active avenger. "Jamie, what did you do?" she asked, though in her heart, she already knew. The specter of her brother was silent for a moment, and then, with a voice that was both his and something other, something twisted by the depths of vengeful love, he confessed. "I brought silence," he said, and in his voice was the quiet of the grave. "I brought them the silence they brought to you." Leah's breath hitched, a sob caught in her throat. The shadows seemed to close in around her, a suffocating blanket woven from the threads of a love that had transcended life, only to become something dark and unrecognizable in death. The specter of Jamie faded into the creeping dawn, leaving Leah alone with the weight of a truth too heavy to bear. Her protector, her little brother, had become her avenger. And in his misguided attempt to shield her heart, he had unleashed a silence more profound than any secret, more eternal than any whispered lie. Leah's hands were steady as she opened the ancient tome that had been Jamie's final obsession. It was filled with rituals and incantations, a legacy of esoteric knowledge that he had never shared. She understood now that Jamie had been delving into secrets far beyond his years, seeking a way to be her guardian even from the shadowed realm of death. She prepared the space in the heart of their old home, where memories lingered in every corner, their shared laughter and tears etched into the very walls. Leah arranged the candles, their flames flickering like the pulse of life against the encroaching darkness. She placed Jamie's favorite toys in a circle, a token of innocence and the bond they shared. Drawing a deep breath, Leah began to recite the ancient words. The air grew thick, charged with an unseen energy that seemed to blur the lines between worlds. She felt Jamie's presence, a tempest of sorrow and rage swirling around her. Jamie, my brother, my protector, Leah's voice was clear, her resolve a beacon in the tumultuous ether. I love you, but you must let go. Your love has become a chain that binds us both. The ghostly visage of Jamie materialized, his form more distinct than ever before, a storm of emotion in his eyes. Leah could see the struggle within him, the desire to stay and shield her clashing with the realization of what he had done. I wanted to keep you safe, Jamie's voice was a haunting melody of regret. But I see now. I see the pain I've caused. The room shook, a physical manifestation of Jamie's turmoil, and Leah could feel the very fabric of reality straining under the weight of his spectral anguish. The candles flickered violently, casting an otherworldly glow as the shadows danced in a frenetic display. Leah continued the ritual, her voice rising above the chaos. I release you, Jamie. With love and memories, with forgiveness and hope, I release you from this earthly tether. She repeated the incantation, each word a solemn drumbeat marking the end of a tragic symphony. The air shimmered with the power of her words, and the toys began to levitate, orbiting Leah as if in a celestial dance. With a final surge of ethereal energy, Jamie's spirit screamed, a sound of liberation and a goodbye. The spectral storm reached a crescendo and then, in a burst of blinding light, it dissipated. Leah was alone, the silence profound, yet it was a different silence than before. It was a peaceful quiet, filled with the gentle echoes of release. She felt the weight of grief and horror lift from her shoulders, replaced by a tender sorrow that spoke of healing yet to come. The sun rose, painting the room with the hues of a new dawn. Leah stood amidst the stillness, a survivor of a haunting both literal and emotional. The shadows retreated, their dark whispering silenced by the light of her resilience. In the days that followed, the inexplicable deaths of Nathan and Emily remained a mystery to the world, but Leah knew the truth. She carried it within her, a bittersweet burden that was now a part of her story. She walked forward into her life, each step a testament to her strength. Leah had faced the ghosts of her past and emerged victorious, her heart heavy but unbroken. The chains were broken, and the spirit set free, and in the quiet aftermath, Leah found the space to breathe, to grieve, and to begin anew.